We're ready to get started. I thank everybody for being here. Good evening and welcome to the 2021 New York City Black Educators Coalition Mayoral Forum. My name is David Banks, and over the course of a 30-year career, I have served as a teacher, an assistant principal, and now as president and CEO of the Eagle Academy Foundation. And tonight represents the coming together of Black organizations in education as a united front to address the issues that we think are important. And I'm joined by members of Black Edfluencers United, which we refer to as BU, and the Association of Black Educators of New York, which we refer to as ABENY. And together we represent our fellow educators, school leaders, administrators, parents, and students who for years have felt left out of the conversation around educational policy in New York City. I invite you to learn more about these organizations. Their websites and social media handles are available in the chat. Tonight, over 1,500 New Yorkers have registered to attend tonight's forum. I want to thank our audience who submitted questions with their registration. We heard you and we have incorporated your feedback. However, in the interest of time and substance, we will not be taking live questions, but we welcome you to share your thoughts and reactions in the chat. Our candidates will be asked 7 questions with 2 minutes to respond to each. The mayoral candidates joining us tonight: Eric Adams, Brooklyn Borough President; Shaun Donovan, former Secretary of Housing and Urban Development; Ray McGuire, former business executive; Dianne Morales, former nonprofit executive; Scott Stringer, glad to see you there, Scott, New York City Comptroller; Maya Wiley, civil rights attorney; and Andrew Yang, entrepreneur and former presidential candidate. I'd like at this time now to introduce you to the panelists who are joining me tonight, and they are Dr. Shaun Blake, who's the president of the Black Edfluencers United, BU; Dr. Joanna Johnson, the Chief Achievement Officer at the Eagle Academy Foundation; Shamik Robinson, the President, the Association of Black Educators of New York; and Adrian Straker, who's the President-elect of the Association of Black Educators of New York. I'm particularly thrilled to welcome one of my young men from Eagle Academy, Ajanai Patterson. He's a senior at the Eagle Academy for Ocean Hill in Brooklyn. Zakia Ansari, who's the Advocacy Director at the Alliance for Quality Education; and Courtney Johnson, who's a middle school teacher from Queens and the Communications Chair for BU. Finally, for the candidates, our panelists and our audience are most interested in hearing the substance of your positions on these issues, and we encourage you to offer specific answers to the questions. So let me be very clear. This is not the forum to offer rhetorical responses, like all children can learn. Everybody that's tuned in tonight from all around the city, we believe that. What we're looking to hear specifically from you is what would you do as mayor to ensure that all of our children have the best educational experience? And because these issues are urgent and time is limited, we are dispensing with the traditional opening statements and getting right to the questions. As a reminder, you have 2 minutes to respond. The first question will come from Shamik Robinson. Shamik?
Thank you, David. Can everybody hear me?
Yes.
Yes, Shamik, we can.
Wonderful, wonderful. As president of the Association of Black Educators of New York, ABENY, thank you for coming, for expressing an interest in supporting us, our families, our students, and our communities. But it's time to get right to work. the economic and the educational impacts of this pandemic on our city, in particular communities of color, have been both intense and tragic. According to consulting firm McKinsey & Company, most of what we already know intuitively, Black students could lose anywhere from 6 to 12 or more months of learning by the end of this pandemic, in spite of technology, Wi-Fi, remote pedagogy, all that's being utilized. In addition to the pre-existing inequity that we face in New York City public schools. As mayor, how will you address this opportunity gap and achievement challenges that threaten to set our community, the Black community, back even further?
The first response to that first question, please, Andrew Yang.
Thank you for the question, Shamik. I'm a public school parent myself. The simple truth is we should be fighting harder to reopen our schools right now. And that's doubly true for communities who are in danger of falling further behind that you just described, and for young children in particular. The data does not show that young children spread the coronavirus to adults, but the data does show that our kids are falling behind in ways that may be irreparable. So what we have to do is we have to actually have a more adaptive response where it's not one size fits all. I know that some people in the teachers unions are saying no school because it's dangerous, but I don't think that's the right response for a lot of communities, a lot of teachers, and a lot of our kids. So what we should be doing is reopening schools for young kids and Black and brown communities that are at higher risk, and fighting to do it immediately. And then we need to be more adaptive at what school is going to look like moving forward. The truth is that online school has been demonstrated to be only 30 to 70% as effective as in-person instruction. So even for the kids who are having school online, they are falling further behind. We need to reopen our schools as quickly as possible.
Thank you. Maya?
Thank you, David. Thank you, Shamik. Let me just say at the outset, it's a pleasure to be here, and I apologize. I'm going to have to hop off at 7 just for a short period because a wonderful friend has broken a black glass ceiling, and I'm going to help her launch that, but I will be back. So here's the thing. We already had a system we know was not working for our children before COVID. COVID made it worse, but we know that we were not a 21st century school system innovating in education. So number one, we have to look at where there have been successes at helping students, particularly Black students, not only catch up, but exceed expectation. Because P-TECH, for example, is a program where even students who are behind grade level have been shown to be able to do college level work. And the reality is that means recognizing we've blown open the box and we have to get out of it. We have to see our partnerships both with our higher education system to do more that's innovative, including our CUNY system. We have to partner with our business sector that can help, as they did with P-TECH, to give us some of those opportunities. We have to get more funding from the state. And I'm not one that's going to ignore that we're getting enough funding. But when we do, we have to make sure that we're doing what other systems have done, which is show that children who are behind can still do accelerated learning and bring those innovations to New York City, and do that with teachers that look like our kids. And that will actually help improve our achievement.
Thank you. Scott?
Well, David, thank you for giving us all an opportunity to be here this evening. Look, I'm a parent of 2 kids in a public school system. I have a 3rd grader and a 2nd grader, got married a little late in life. So I've got these 2 little kids, and I'll be the first to tell you that for my wife and I, remote learning has been a constant struggle. For the first time in my life, I think about not being able to help my kids in the way they need to be helped. And they have struggled at certain points, but I recognize so clearly that I am a parent of privilege. I have a credit card. I can buy a remote learning device if it breaks. I can get my kids the help they need if things take a wrong turn. And the reality is that's for the privileged. The people who are struggling today are the 100,000 kids who lack internet access across approximately 40,000 households. We have 60,000 students who do not have Wi-Fi enabled devices, and we have parents in public housing that have one device for 3 kids. This is discrimination, even in a pandemic. And I believe very strongly that we have to do a couple of specific things. First, right now, before the mayor takes office, this mayor must have a mental health plan for all of our children. These kids are going to suffer. A lot of these kids lost their moms and dads as frontline workers. My own kids lost their grandmother. They have still not had closure. So we're gonna have to invest in making sure that there is wellness and help for kids and parents. Second, we have got to make sure that the city which grants franchises to internet providers, they got to step up. I want to create an internet passport so low-income families can access broadband. I want to use the city's purchasing power to drive down the cost of high-speed broadband. And I want to make sure that every child has a device while we're going through the pandemic. And look, we also have to talk health. Yes, we all want to see schools open. I know I do. But at the end of the day, there's a lot of parents and school administrators who are getting sick, and they need certainty. And we've got to better protect the teachers and the parents as we open up our schools, and we have to put that on the table.
Thank you, Scott. Dianne.
Thanks, David. Let me start off by saying, I'm a mother of 2 children, both of whom had IEPs in the New York City public school system. I'm also the only mayoral candidate who has been an educator in the New York City public school system. And I'm also a former DOE employee who managed operations and equity at the Department of Education. And I'm a member of New Yorkers for Racially Just Public Schools. So I want to just take a moment to thank and honor our Black educators, many of whom are still serving as essential in what has been essentially a thankless city. Let me just start off by saying this in answer to your question. The first thing we have to do is keep our Black and brown families from dying. We have to protect our families. Right now, the idea of rushing back to schools without first providing our families and our teachers and our children with the adequate protections is highly problematic. We need to stop disposing of our children and families. That's not okay. The second thing is we need to take care of the mental health of our communities. We need to recognize that this pandemic and all of the pandemics that preceded this one have had a devastating impact on our communities, disproportionate to any other community across the city. And we also have to recognize that our children are not going to learn in an environment where they're not feeling healthy mentally or loved. And so if we're not addressing changing the fundamental culture of our school settings and creating a space where our children feel seen, heard, and loved, and where we are taking care of their mental health and their social emotional health, nothing else matters. So that's the first thing that we have to do. The second thing I think we have to do once we've taken care of all of that is if we're ready to get our children back to schools, then we can talk about how we adopt and expand other spaces beyond our school settings, our community-based organizations, our arts and cultural institutions, so that we can provide safe spaces first that are ventilated and have access to technology, and then begin to recover on an instructional perspective. But we've got to love our.
Okay, I'm sorry, and I know these are passionate issues.
I'm sorry, I got you.
But you just saw what we're doing. We're not gonna have a Donald Trump moment here, folks. If we get too far past the 2 minutes, we're gonna shut it down just because we want to respect everybody's time on this. But thank you so much for your passion, Dianne. Ray, please.
Teacher, educated, great man. Thank you for having me. Can you all hear me?
Yes, sir.
Just let me be clear. Education is what got me here. And through the sacrifices of my mother, I was able to get in education. I started getting bused at the 6th grade, and I came east to test myself against the big boys and girls. And now I'm here. Wouldn't be here without education. But now, David, we're dealing with a situation where I got 500,000 to 600,000 Black and brown kids who've been systemically failed, resulting in intergenerational poverty. And COVID has exposed what we've already known, what we've always known. And so I look today at our kids who don't have access to broadband, our kids who don't feel safe. What is the prescription? You asked for specifics. So what should we do? One, we need to make certain, let's start with the teachers and make certain that the teachers are adequately prepared. We went from in classroom where they were well prepared to out of classroom and digital. We need to make certain that we take care of the teachers first. We then need to make certain that we can include the parents in the educational experience, which is so vital. Then we need to make certain that as we've gone from analog to digital, from in classroom to out of classroom, that we adequately prepare our children. And today they have been left behind once again because of this digital divide. I would make certain day one that each of our children had access to a device. I would make certain that each of our children have access to broadbands. And I've done this sitting on the board of the New York Public Library, where, as you know, we've given access through Wi-Fi hotspots to children so they get access to broadband. And I would make certain that when we reopen schools, that they were safe, that the teachers felt safe, that the parents felt safe, and that the children and the parents felt that their children were safe. And I would make certain that during the course of the summer that I instituted a tutors program. And I would pay an extra stipend to the teachers, and I would set up a situation where I would get college students, I would certify them to make certain that those children who are behind, those children who are left behind can get caught up.
Thank you.
That's the specific prescription I would use.
Thank you, Ray. Shaun.
Thank you, David. Thank you, Shamik. And I am so glad to be here with heroes who have been on the front lines this past year, making sure our kids were safe, were learning. And I want to be very clear that we have a lot of good ideas we've heard from candidates tonight, but we must begin by rebuilding trust with our families, with our educators, with our communities, particularly Black and Brown communities. And so the first thing I would do as mayor is bring my chancellor and engage in a listening tour around this city to make sure that I was hearing directly from Black and Brown communities, from students that are homeless, are struggling with disabilities or other challenges, to hear directly from them what we need to do. I would absolutely put in place the supports that we need to rebuild not just the educational achievement, but the mental health. The trauma that our kids have been through is completely unacceptable. And that's why I have a very specific proposal to add 150 social workers, why I would create an innovative education recovery corps that would put our young people, CUNY students and others, side by side with teachers, not just helping on educational recovery, but also on emotional and social recovery as well. And I would put together an innovative investing in student success program, dollar for dollar matched public dollars and private dollars from philanthropy that I would invest in schools to make sure that we have not just the technology, but all the other pieces that we need in place to be able to recover, the tutoring, everything else that we need to make sure that we are rebuilding from this devastating crisis.
Thank you. Thank you, Shaun. And finally, Eric.
Well, thank you so much. Thanks for doing this. Over 1,000 people. This is probably the largest forum we have been on thus far. Congratulations to your entire team. And it really shows the emotion of education. Day one, before you serve a meal, set the table. First thing I'm going to do, I'm going to pick a chancellor that came up through New York City's system. They were principals in the classroom, understand what we need on the ground. Second, we're going to build a system that's built on equity, not equality. If you give every child a pair of shoes at size 6, but you have children there that fit a size 9, you may have did something that was equitable, but was it you may have done something that was equality, but was it what we needed for all children to have what they need? Equity is the key to proper education. Third, I'm going to speak to my student leaders, my principals. This is what have been doing for years to make sure that we are speaking with the people closest to the action. Fourth, I'm elected to be mayor, not the chancellor. I am not going to run the Department of Education from City Hall through tweets, through newspaper articles. I'm going to have my student and teacher leaders know before something goes out so they can execute. Lastly, we have to ask our data community, pay your share. We're going to partner with Albany, do a data tax, use the money from that data tax to go directly into our classroom to get our students prepared for the future. Real results.
Okay, we're hearing somebody sound like they're loading on a plane. I'm not sure what that is. But you know, it's just an example of sometimes of some of the things that we have to deal with in New York City. We have to be flexible and be prepared. And so let's continue to move forward. The second question comes from Dr. Shango Blake.
Yes, thank you, Dave. I want to thank the candidates for joining us this evening. I'm the president of Black Edfluencers United, BU for short, where our vision is to serve Black educators, influence others, and impact Black students. We are committed to raising awareness about systemic inequities in education. For example, Black students are historically overrepresented in New York City suspension rates and underrepresented in gifted and talented programs. So how can we re-envision the public education system so that it meets the academic development and social, cultural needs of Black students?
Okay, thank you. Maya, would you go first?
Absolutely. Look, I have been a Black child in a Black segregated, overcrowded, and underfunded school. I have also spent, as a result, the last 30 years of my career as a civil rights lawyer and racial justice advocate. So central to this is that we can't see the criminalization of our children. And that starts with two things. We have said in our gun violence prevention strategy that we will put more counselors, more social workers, so that every school has one, and that we will ensure that there's student support teams that include administrators and educators and a social worker, because we usually know what children are suffering, but what we haven't done as a system is provide a holistic support structure for them so that we're seeing them not as problems, but as our precious gems that we can keep and retain in our system and know that they can succeed because we've given them all the tools. So that's number one. But number two is that we have to ensure that we are doing implicit bias training, because we know that far too often our kids are seen as dangerous despite the fact that they're not, because they're Black. And that is something that some implicit bias training has shown to actually reduce. But the other thing is we have to have the data, the tracking, and the accountability so that we're intervening and taking action when we see those rates as disproportionate for our Black students, which has happened, but we haven't intervened aggressively and appropriately. I will do that. And I will say one other thing, trauma. We've heard it already on this panel. We put in our gun violence prevention proposal that we will have cognitive behavioral as well as dialectical behavioral therapy in schools for kids who are traumatized, because that is tested, researched, and our kids don't get it.
Thank you. Thank you, Maya. Scott?
Look, I believe very strongly that diversifying our schools is critical, but we also have to diverse our teaching staff. It may come as a shock to people, but not folks tonight, that 40% of our teaching staff in New York City are people of color in a system that's 80% students of color. My teacher residency program would be the largest in the nation. 40% of our teachers leave after 5 years. We must recruit 1,000 aspiring teachers every year. We have to pair them with mentor master teachers, and we have to pay them for their work while they complete their certification. I want to aggressively recruit from communities of color. We need to build role models, which means we need to get teachers of all different backgrounds, teachers of color, into the system, make this the new teaching force that can relate to our kids. But that's one step. The next step is we've got to realize, and I praise Bill de Blasio for this, pre-K was very good. But now we've got to go to 0 to 3. 80% of brain development occurs 0 to 3. But let's face it, most people in the city can't afford $21,000 for childcare. My NYC under 3 plan would triple the number of kids in childcare. It would build out the end of childcare deserts, creating a system where 20,000 women, mostly people of color, would go back to the workforce because we would have real childcare in this city. That's the success model. So we need to bring in diverse teachers. We need a teacher residency program. We need to be able to get those 1,000 teachers. By the way, 40% of our teachers leave the system totally in 5 years. That makes no sense. But we have to start with education at the beginning, 0 to 3, NYC under 3. And I'm working with Latrice Walker and Jessica Ramos in Albany to pass legislation that would give us the funding that can begin over the next couple of years to build out the largest childcare system in the history of this country, let alone New York City.
Thank you, Scott. Dianne?
Wait, so how do I know when my time is up?
When you see me lean in, and you
Okay.
really know it's up
Okay.
when nobody else is hearing you anymore. But go ahead and start.
All right, so I've talked about defunding the police, and my defund platform is directly connected to the idea of creating a positive school climate for our young people and eradicating the myth that our children are inherently less than, inherently violent, or need to be controlled in our schools. We need to redirect the approximately $450 million that is currently being channeled towards having police in school. We need to redirect that to providing mental health services, to increasing our student support services in the schools, towards restorative and transformative practices, training every DOE employee in all of those things, engaging young people as mediators, or peers in remediation, and expanding social workers in our schools. Also, we need to increase and build out culturally responsive curriculum and education. That means changing what we teach to include the history so that our children see themselves reflected in their classroom and in instruction. And we need to change how we teach it so that we have professionals that reflect our students, that look like our students, that are teaching with a variety of different strategies from a curriculum perspective, from a pedagogical perspective, that are using diverse forms of assessment, and that we have policies that reflect and respect the history, culture, language, and identities of our students. How's that for time?
Fantastic. Thank you. You had about another minute, but we're going to move on. Ray?
Yeah, listen, the answer to the question is multiple. Let me tell you how I think about this. One, we need to have culturally responsive teaching, not one size fits all. Two, we need to have diverse leadership and staff at the schools who can support and relate to different families. Three, we need to empower our principals so that they can build diverse teams. They know what's taking place on the ground. They know the kind of education that they aspire for their children to have, for our children to have. So I would empower the principals to build the teams. And I would make certain that we have an understanding of what best practices are so that we can disseminate best practices. That gets us to that cultural sensitivity. I would meet the child where the child lives. And how do I think about this further? Pre-K is okay, but what we know is that by the time many of our children arrive at pre-K, they're already behind. So I have a vision that we will outline called Cradle to Career, which means that as these children are developing, they're learning. From 0 to 4, I want to make certain that we give the right child care, the right toddler care, the right services. So when they arrive at pre-K, they're prepared. And then I want to make certain, from my account, that by the end of the 3rd grade, every child in New York City can read. By the end of the 3rd grade, because between 0 and the end of the 3rd grade, our children are learning to read. After that, they're reading to learn. I want to make certain that that happens, guaranteed it happens. And then I want to make certain that beginning at the 6th grade, we expose our students to a lot of different possibilities. And I want to make certain we have public-private partnerships so they get summer jobs. They become educators. I want to make sure that each one of them is financially literate, because we suffer from that today. They can become welders, they can become plumbers, but they also have a summer job. So by the time they graduate, they can either go to a career to which they've been exposed, or they can go to a 2 or 4 year college. So it's cradle to career, cradle to job. Let's start early. Let's not just accept that pre-K is where we end. That's where we begin. I want to begin before pre-K. 0, cradle to career.
Thank you, Ray. Shaun?
Thank you, Dr. Blake, for the question as well. Look, we have to have a mayor who understands that every single issue in this city is an issue of equity. That's why the very first policy that I announced when I declared my candidacy for mayor was that I would be the first mayor in the city's history to have a chief equity officer reporting directly to me. We also need a mayor who understands that the segregation and discrimination in our city, in our country, is rooted in our housing and neighborhoods, and has to attack that segregation, that discrimination at its root. That's why I did that as HUD secretary. In fact, President Biden last week, when he focused on ensuring equity was a driving force for his entire administration, he pointed to the two landmark civil rights and fair housing rules that I established as HUD secretary, the very same rules that Donald Trump, when he still had a Twitter account, was attacking last year. So that's the work that I would do more broadly, specifically on education. We need a mayor who will dismantle the middle school screens, the high school screens around attendance and timeliness, and others that we know are having a discriminatory impact on our students. We need real changes like weighted lotteries and others that really begin to make systemic change. And we also have to go farther than that. We know that we have specific successful examples of schools that are both highly integrated, closing the racial achievement gap, and also are ones that are making sure that we have exactly the kind of learning that should be happening. And we ought to be investing more in expanding those schools. We ought to be establishing more schools that are successful models for high achievement and diverse learning. Finally, I agree with Scott, we need to make sure that a system that is 42% teachers of color with 85% kids of color has to change. I'm the only candidate that's made a specific commitment to getting to 2/3 of our teachers of color within the first term. And that's something that I would absolutely focus on and make sure it happened, because CUNY is—
Thank you, Shaun. Thank you. Eric?
Thank you. Thank you for keeping us on time, because I know I'm falling within the limits, and I want my colleagues to do the same. Let's be clear. We don't have to reimagine or reinvent the wheel. It's already there. Let's scale it up. Great examples. Dr. Adelaide Sanford's Transform PS 21. David Banks, Eagle Academy, right in Brownsville, where these children were not graduating. You embraced them and showed them how they could believe in themselves and see themselves in every part of their education. Mega Evans Preparatory Academy, Dr. Wilshire, he graduates and placed more students of color in Ivy League schools than anywhere in the state. The problem is the systemic racism that DOE and city halls throughout time believe white ice is colder. If the ideas are not coming from white academia, it doesn't exist. We have been marginalizing Black and brown educators for years. And let me say this, a reporter stopped me the other day and she says, Eric, why is everyone else saying 0 to 3 and you keep hanging up on this prenatal stuff? I said, you go through the research. Go look at the fact that in 4 weeks, a child has 10,000 brain cells, and in 24 weeks has 10 billion brain cells while he and she is in her mother's womb. If you don't give that baby the right iron, folic acid, and all the nutrition they need, those brains are not going to develop appropriately. So I'm not trying to be popular. I'm not trying to get the right soundbite. We got to get this right. And if we don't start with prenatal, then we're not going to get this right. Our children are going to continue to be left behind and catch up. So I ask people, go read the research like I did, and you'll stop having a conversation about later in their career.
Thank you, Eric. And finally on this question, Andrew?
Thank you. I agree with Scott and Shaun that we need to recruit diverse teachers and educators that reflect the community. I agree with Ray and Eric that it starts very early. And most of you are educators, you know that 2/3 of our kids' educational outcomes are determined outside of school. That's time spent with the parent, words read to them when they're young, nutrition, stress levels in the house. whether they're able to learn at home. And we've given you very difficult, almost impossible tasks where you can control a third of our kids' educational successes, but we hold you 100% responsible. So we have to do the work early on. We have to make it so that kids actually show up able to learn and ready to learn. And there was a question about gifted and talented and not representing our community, and that's wrong. I'm not a get rid of the test guy, but I'm like someone who believes in teachers. And I'm just going to tell a very quick story. My wife, Evelyn, grew up in Queens, and when she was young, a teacher saw a spark in her and said, hey, I want you to be in this like precursor to, you know, our current programs. If you're an educator, you've been around a kid with a spark and you've said, hey, I really think this kid has something special. Like, we should believe in you because you know our kids better than everyone.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you to all the candidates for that. We're now moving on to our third question, but I do want to say, and I'm sorry that all you candidates don't get a chance to see what's going on in the chat. But folks are sending me messages that this is the most lit chat that they have ever seen. We're going to create a forum just around the people that are in the chat. It's going down. Third question from Zakia Ansari. Zakia?
Thanks, David. Hi, everyone.
Hello.
I am a product of public schools from Head Start to high school. I've raised 8 children, graduated all of them out of New York City public schools. The last, my son, Nasir, who actually went to Eagle in Brooklyn, and him being the youngest of 8 children and the only boy, he continues to foster that brotherhood that was offered to him in Eagle. And I'm so excited and proud that he was able to participate in that. I also have been organizing parents with parents, as a parent, young people and others across New York State. So been doing this for about 20 years now. And so as we're talking about throwing around equity, I have a little context. So last Wednesday at the panel for educational policy, parents, especially parents of color, overwhelmingly testified against the funding of about almost $5 million to Pearson for a gifted and talented test. The reasons range from in the midst of a pandemic where Black and brown immigrant children are suffering, they don't have computers, they need social and emotional support, and so much more, that maybe spending that much money on a racist test is not equity. They exercise their right to fight back through powerful testimonies and convinced enough PEP members, Panel for Educational Policy members, to vote no. And to be honest, we don't know if the mayor will cave on democracy in this moment. So my question is, as mayor, what will you do specifically to ensure that we put the control back into the hands of the community?
Thank you, Zakia. Scott, would you lead us off?
Well, I do support mayoral control of a public school system, but I do not support a dictatorship. Many of you will remember back when I was Manhattan Borough President during the Bloomberg administration, I appointed Patrick Sullivan to the PEP, which was one of the most independent appointments ever. He challenged contracts. He challenged the Bloomberg administration on education, and he was an organizer with parents. There should be a parent base to build consensus and also perspective. I believe that the DOE should move from sort of running the CECs to bringing the borough presidents or other entities in to give a level of independence to the education system. We've got to listen to parents. And I know this as a parent. For anyone who goes to a parent association meeting, as I do, it's all about the parents understanding what's best for children, working with teachers and networking. But the truth is, there's a whole lot of parents who are frontline workers who can't take the time to do the meetings like other parents who have time on their hands. And we have to create a mechanism for all parents, parents of color, who can actually sit and be part of the education system. I do not believe that mayoral control should be pushing parents away. And I think that courageous vote at the PEP not only shows the failed education system at the DOE over the past years. I've done those audits and those investigations. I know the DOE isn't listening to parents. I know the DOE is not putting resources in the classrooms. I've found computers in boxes. I've found a total disregard to reasonable suggestions. And when I'm mayor, because I know where the money and the bodies are buried, I'm breaking that bureaucracy. I'm moving money, hundreds of millions of dollars, into the classrooms. I'm going to sit with David Banks and listen to the work that he's done, bringing parents to the table so that everybody has a voice. And when parents have a voice, I believe that kids have a voice. And that is what I'm going to do as mayor.
Thank you, Scott. Thank you. Dianne?
All right. So the first thing I want to go back to is All of our children are gifted and talented. The New York City public schools should actually be the place where they discover their gifts and talents and are nurtured to grow them further. Racist screens and testing does not support that process. And the reality of it is, no one wants to say the obvious. The system blames our Black parents for the fate of Black children. There is virtually no respect in our system right now for Black parents, including the demands on their work life that are significantly different than the white parents that attend our public school system. And even for those that are unemployed, there's no consideration for the economic stress and what it does to the family. We don't respect our single Black mothers. Hello. We don't respect returning people and those impacted by racist criminal legal system, and we don't have the right language or cultural sensitivity. We need to find a way to engage our entire village. And that means connecting with activists like Zakia and CBOs that are already doing the work on the ground, and give them a place at the table and give them leadership at the table where they are helping to guide and drive decision-making. We also need to create student-powered spaces outside of the school and in the school. I've consistently advocated for including parents, families, and communities in decision-making. As a CEO of a CBO that was partnered with schools in the South Bronx for the last 10 years, I pushed for that. That's what we need to do. The families and the village have the solution, and we know what our families need. We just need to be given the authority and the accountability to help make that happen.
Thank you, Dianne. Ray?
Yeah, listen, my 94-year-old Black mother made it possible for me to get the education that I've been fortunate to get through her sacrifices. And what you know, growing up, and what is still, notwithstanding all the things that have happened, what is still so true is that there's a triangle, and the triangle includes three parties. It includes the teacher, the parent or the caregiver, and the student and the child, who is me. And what we know is that we need to make certain that that triangle works. And what does that include? Parental involvement is critical to this. We need to accommodate the parents, especially those who have different schedules. And I sometimes heard the debate between my mother's boss and my mother about whether or not she was going to come to work at a time when she was getting me off to school. And I knew what won that debate every time. It was, she's going to make certain that I was where I needed to be in school. And so she worked directly with the teachers to make certain of that. The other thing is that we need to make certain that we hold the school officials accountable for making certain that the parents are involved. And when I become mayor, it's going to be critical that I hear the parents, that relationship remains. And yes, there's going to be a chancellor there, but I'm not going to remove myself from that conversation, because it was so important for me to be included in that conversation as I was growing up. The other thing is that the teachers should have the ability to communicate on a fairly regular basis the progress that the children are making, so the parents are involved in that. And it has been said, I think by Diana, that the CBOs are so critical to this. We ought to hold weekly sessions or frequent sessions so the CBOs can expose the parents to the different opportunities to make certain that we're all engaged. That triangle has now been breached. We need to make certain that we fix that triangle to include the parents. Let's not just legislate. Parents know best what's and where their children are. These are their children. They're our children. So I want to make certain the system treats our children the way I was fortunate to be treated. Include the parents in the discussion with the teachers and hold the teachers accountable for making certain that happens. That's the way I would approach it.
Thank you, Ray. Shaun?
Shaun, you're muted.
You're muted.
Thank you. So I said earlier that the first thing I would do as mayor with my chancellor is engage in a listening session with a diverse group of parents, teachers, students across this city. But let's be real too. I was the budget director for President Obama over the $4 trillion federal budget. If we're not willing to actually invest money in the priorities of our parents and our communities, we will not make change in this system. So I have a very specific set of proposals around the PEP, making sure that we are actually putting resources, money into the PEP to hire staff, to be able to do real policy analysis, to have real representation in the discussions and the decision-making around the future of our school system. And we have to recognize that our community education councils, 36 of them around the city, are not given a real voice at this point in the work of our school system. And so I would begin by making sure that those are truly representative of our city, that through outreach in multiple languages, in communities, that we have a much more diverse set of community education councils, and through participatory budgeting, I would ensure that they have a real say in what we are doing with our education system here, so that they can make choices in a true democratic way in order to drive our schools to toward greater equity and better outcomes for Black and brown communities.
Thank you so much, Shaun. Eric?
Thank you so much. And sister, thank you for the question, particularly when you talked about your son attending Eagle Academy. I know how well Eagle Academy is doing. I was able to secure $3 million so they can scale up their program, not only in their schools, but throughout the entire number of schools that they wanted to get involved in. I know how important it is. And also know the importance of having children's voices being heard in the budgetary process. I'm the only borough president and the only elected official of my knowledge that had a participatory budget plan specifically for students to decide how they wanted the money to be utilized in their school. I don't have to find educators to find out how to scale up, to have involvement in school. I know them personally. I know about David Banks. I know about George Leonard over at Bedford Academy. His numbers are impressive. I know my executive superintendents, when they came to me and said the DOE did not understand why it was important to give children self-care. And I sent them away to learn mindfulness, yoga, and other self-care methods so they can pass it on to their students. I know former principal Romaine, who transitioned, and when she came to me and said no one wanted to listen about giving our children real life education around nutrition, and I teamed up with Farm Shelf and put money into her school and turned around the attendance of their school. Listen, I am not a new friend. I'm an old friend that came up through the public educational system, that communicate with my leaders, my teachers, and my students. I know how to do this. You don't have to figure it out when I'm mayor. You will already have the relationship with me.
Thank you, Eric. Andrew?
Thank you for this question. The reality is that we've been failing Black and brown kids and families for years, decades, even generations. And that's manifest when you look at the results of these screenings. The problem though is if you get rid of the screenings, it doesn't mean you stopped failing our kids. What we all want is we want enrichment programs that reflect the deep and rich diversity of our city. And there's no reason we can't get there. Now, if you have a data point, you don't need to be tyrannized by that data point. But at the same time, you can't shy away from the data, because the reality is our kids are going to be subject to tests that are not that dissimilar if they decide that they want to attend a 4-year school. So I think we should keep our eye on what the goals are, which is enrichment programs for our kids that actually work for them, that empower our teachers and our schools and our communities, the people that know our kids best. But I do not think we should be trying to get rid of a data point just because right now it illustrates just how badly we are failing our communities.
Okay, thank you. And finally, Maya.
I just want to start with what the data point is to go back to Zakia's question. The data point is that we have 4-year-olds with families paying sometimes up to $2,000 to take a test that so many education experts don't think has any value or validity to sort them, and then it becomes they're sorted by race. Let's be explicit about that. That's not a data point about deservingness, nor is it a test to try to test whether you can make it in society, because it's just wrong and unfair. And so fundamentally, the PEP did the right thing. Secondly, in terms of parent involvement, engagement, central, and it is central to everything I have done, because when I chaired this, co-chaired with Hazel Dukes and Jose Calderon, the School Diversity Advisory Group, what we did is we required the DOE to agree that we were going to have a public and transparent process where not only did we have 42 people actively a part of that group, that included principals, that included teachers, that included parents. We even had 2 different student groups, Integrate NYC and Teens Take Charge, in some instances, middle school students sitting at the table with us. And we spoke in every single borough. We had town halls, over 800 people engaged in town halls over the course of creating those recommendations. And they informed our recommendations, because what communities were asking for, in addition to more voice, was also more resources for their schools, not only to focus on admissions practices, to have diverse teachers, to have restorative justice, to have counselors, everything we've talked about here. And we put every single one in our recommendations. I stand by them. And I agree that you have to have an accountable mayor who actually is accountable for implementing those kinds of recommendations and staying accountable to them.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Maya. We have a total of 7 questions this evening. We are now moving on to question 4, and I'm excited to introduce one of the young men we are so proud of. He's a senior at the Eagle Academy, Ajanai Patterson. Ajanai?
Welcome, everyone. My name is Ajanai Patterson. I'm a senior at Eagle Brooklyn, and I'm thrilled to be here with you tonight. I'm proud to say that this fall, I'll be attending Connecticut College on a Posse scholarship. I'm extremely grateful for that. Yet, I also feel that there's a large gap in my education because the lives of Black and brown people have been missing from our history books. My one question to all the mayoral candidates is, given the recent deaths of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor, and with the steady emphasis on the Black Lives Matter movement across the country, there's an increased importance to focus on the lives of African Americans and Hispanics, as well as the robust history their ancestors have amassed to this very day. If elected mayor of New York City, what would be your plan to ensure that all students, K through 12, be given a curriculum that consistently provides them the time to learn the vast contributions of our Black and brown people living in our country?
Thank you, Ajanai. We're going to start off with Dianne. Maya, I'm going to make sure I get you in before you have to jump. So just give us a minute. We're going to start off with Dianne. Thank you.
You can give me Maya time also.
No, she's just going to shift the order a little bit. That's all. Dianne?
That's an incredible question. I'm really grateful for it. So let me just start here. You know, for too long, our Black students, or Black and brown students and families, have been provided with the bare minimum in the Department of Education at best. We're not talking right now about wanting anyone to let us keep our lunch money. We need to demand access to the room where the lunches are being made. Quality for Black children, Black and brown children in this school system is more than just Black History Month. It's more than internships and pipelines. It's fundamentally transforming the system that has been founded upon a history that once declared it illegal for Black people to read and called for the death of anyone who taught a Black person to read. So the true purpose of education is really for us to foster critical thinking skills so that our children are able to navigate and make meaning of the world for themselves, so they're able to engage fully in democracy, exercise their rights and advocate for themselves, and able to contribute to the larger community and live in dignity and provide for their families. That means that we must fully integrate a culturally responsive curriculum into our schools that reflects the history and the experiences of all of our students. And that we must have teachers at the front of the room who also reflect the history and experiences of our students, who love our students, who see our students, and who value our students. And that is a fundamental transformation from where we are right now. It is possible. That's why I call not just for desegregation, but I think it's really important for us to distill that. we need, the answer is not just integration. We need to move towards a culturally responsive system with diverse teachers, inclusive curriculum that supports our children. Any proposal that doesn't call for that continues to fall short of meeting our community's needs, and that's not good enough.
Thank you. Thank you, Dianne. Maya?
So thank you. Let me just first start by saying, we actually chose a high school for my daughter, public high school, open admission transfer school. And part of the reason was because they taught the Haitian Revolution in history. And that's just one example. We saw all kinds of books on the bookshelves that related specifically to her experience and to our family's experience. And we know that for students to be successful, for our kids, Black kids to be successful, schools have to be safe, schools have to be supportive, they have to have leadership that look like the kids, but that the curriculum has to follow it. And I just want to shout out Zakia Ansari, because I know she's done a tremendous amount of work on this. And when we at the School Diversity Advisory Group, listening to people, listening to our students, listening to our parents, we included in our recommendations that there had to be culturally appropriate and responsive curriculum, that every child could see themselves in the curriculum. And that also includes how we deliver it, not just that it's there in substance, because I completely agree with you and Johnny that we have to have it done in a way that's project-based, that's also culturally responsive to how kids want to learn it, because it has to be so much more engaged and enable them to bring their full talents to it. That is a radically different way to approach teaching. And so many of our teachers want to teach that way. And the system itself tells them they have to constantly test the kids and teach to those tests, rather than blow all that up and actually help them find their talents with their own voice from their own cultural experience that they can see directly in the curriculum and apply in creative ways. And that's what I'll do as mayor. And I apologize, I will be back after I shout out and celebrate a sister who broke a Black glass ceiling. I appreciate you and thank you.
Thank you. We'll see you soon. Ray?
Yeah, Johnny, thank you. Congratulations. Posse is one of the great organizations, and there are others out there in which I have been a part and been invested for so long. You look a little like how I look then, except you got a little less hair. I had a big fro there, Johnny. So, I'm kind of working with a little more hair than what you had. But listen, the question is so fundamental to who we are as a people and how we think about ourselves and the respect and dignity that we give each other. And so the way we need to do this is first we need to talk to the teachers and get the teachers educated on the curriculum. And then we need to make certain that that curriculum, and I want to listen to the parents again on this, that curriculum is a curriculum that reflects the richness of the culture from the African diaspora on. And we need to make certain that that curriculum is one that each of us gets exposed to. You know it, maybe you know it because of what you've done through your regular education. You also know it through the things to which you've been exposed at Posse. And I want to make certain, Johnny, that the kids, especially the ones who look like you and me, get that exposure. I want to make certain that they get exposure to arts. And I've been involved in making certain that arts education is there, which is now no longer part of the curriculum, because there's a lot of richness there, arts and culture, so that we can celebrate that. And we've not for a long time celebrated that. I want to make certain that we invest that into the curriculum, the richness and diversity of that. And I want to make certain that we also get you all ready for the world that's outside. I want to make sure that you have financial literacy, that you have digital competency, that when you go to Connecticut, that you have the same skill set as those who don't look like you, so that you can go and compete the way I was able to go and compete. That's what we need. And that's what I want to make certain that we have in the curriculum, which is where we need to make sure we invest in the principals, so the principals can invest in the teachers, and so they get taught what it is that is necessary to teach. And we need to emphasize that to make certain that that dignity that we have as a people.
All right, I think we reached that limit. Thank you, Ray. The next person to respond to Ajani's question is Shaun.
Ajani, congratulations, and can't wait to see what you do at Connecticut College. Excited for you. And I want to go back to something that I said a few minutes ago about how we can't ever hope to get where we need to be as a city, as a school system, without fundamentally changing who teaches our kids so that they reflect who our city is. And I have made a very specific commitment that we would get to 2/3 of our teachers by the end of my first term being teachers of color. And I want to be very clear. We have the ingredients to solve this problem right here in New York. CUNY is one of the great jewels of the public education system in this country. They do a phenomenal job of training teachers, and we ought to be fully utilizing the talent and making sure that folks can teach in their own communities in this city. But we should also recognize that it isn't just about who's in the classroom. It's about making sure that the curriculum and what we are teaching fully reflects who we are as a city, as a nation. And let's be clear, there is nothing wrong with New York that can't be solved by what's right with New York. Think about the Schomburg Center in Harlem. It is one of the most remarkable research institutions on Black history and culture in this country, in the world. Why isn't the mayor making sure that Schomburg is part of what we are doing in developing our curriculum? My own history is that I took a class with Julian Bond, the great civil rights hero, in college. And I was deeply, deeply lucky to have that experience. It changed my life. It changed my view of the world. It led me to meet John Lewis, who is over my right shoulder and became a hero of mine I worked with over 30 years. That history of this country that has not been taught, the false way that the Civil War on through the last 400 years of history has been taught, is simply unacceptable. We have the ingredients in this city to be able to change that, and we must put that history, that cultural richness to work on behalf of making this a city that works for everyone.
Thank you, Shaun. Eric?
Young brother, out of the night that covers me, black as the pit from pole to pole, I thank whatever gods may be for my unconquerable soul. You know that so well in Eagle Academy because you said it just about every day and every time you thought about it. That is the type of reinforcement we need in our schools in a real way. And where should we go? How about a massive recruitment on the place where our senator from Georgia came from, where one of the top organizers in Georgia that changed the face of the Senate seat, where our vice president has come from. HBCUs, the schools that we laughed at for years. We thought that they had a substandard education because they were not Ivy League white schools, but we had quality of people that not only believed in profit, but they believed in people and developing the minds of young people. And so I'm going to have a massive campaign with all of my HBCUs, with my fraternities, my sororities. I'm going to get them engaged in our conversation. And we're going to start the day of saying those positive reinforcement in a real way. And we're going to get away from the testing that kills the joy of learning. Our schools right now is merely schooling, not education. And we're going to have real experiences where you're going to go to the location where Shaun Bell lost his life and learn the civics about correct policing. We're going to take down those walls that prevent you from developing your full personhood. And the books you read will look like you. The tools that we use to develop who you are and your possibilities are going to be placed in the fabric of our educational system. That's what I'm going to do as mayor.
Thank you, Eric. Andrew.
Ajay, congratulations. You're the best dressed guy here too. You're on your way. If there's any place in the US that should have history that reflects the incredible diversity of our country, it should be New York City. And you need teachers that reflect the diversity. You need curricula that reflect that diversity. I agree with Ray too, that we should be emphasizing the arts, in part because the data shows that that actually results in better outcomes. I don't know if you had that experience yourself, Ajay, but The arts, unfortunately, is one of the first things to go when budgets get tight. And the data says that's actually the opposite of what we should be doing. I also agree with Ray that we need to make education as relevant to our kids as possible, including financial literacy and having them have some investment portfolios, either mock or preferably real. I mean, imagine if you had some real money to work with, and I think kids would learn much more actively. So we need to try and make it relevant, practical. We need to make the history that we teach practical and relevant and actually reflective of who we are as a city and as a community. We're really excited for you, Ajani, and thank you for the question.
Thank you so much. And finally, on this question, Scott?
Growing up in Washington Heights back in the day, I went to a public high school, John F. Kennedy High School in the Bronx. And it was there that I got the education from my classmates, kids of all different backgrounds, all different experiences. We were a community school. We knew we were being ignored. We knew we always didn't have resources like the schools around us, but we had these great teachers and we had the diversity of our own life experiences. And that is the power of a public school education. The fact that my little guy can walk into a school that looks much different from himself, people who come from different cultures, people who look differently. I can have my kid come home just in first grade and say, Daddy, I learned about a great man. And I said, who's the great man? He said, Dr. King. He said that our skin color should not determine how we talk to other kids. I couldn't believe in public school that that was the curriculum that started to have a conversation. The next mayor has to double down because history and the future demands of us to talk about Black lives, to talk about the protests, to talk about George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, and Eric Garner. These are the lessons that kids of color must learn, but I would also say kids who are also white kids have to learn the history and respect the people who they go to school with, who they're going to be friends with. And I feel so passionate about this is why my kids are in public school. And as mayor, I'm going to make sure that we have a teacher residency program, that we make sure we hire 1,000 teachers, that we hire teachers of all different backgrounds, Black teachers, Latino teachers, to come into the school system and give kids the honest education that they so need to prepare themselves. There's the schoolyard education I got as a kid, and then there's the teachers who helped me as well. But this has served me well running for office in New York City because that education taught me the ability to go anywhere in this city, to church, to synagogue, to a civic group, whether it's Southeast Queens or Bed-Stuy or the Upper West Side. Every kid must have this education. You know this, David, from your own experience. And lastly, I just want to just mention one more important part of this. We've got to make sure that.
Yeah. I'm sorry. Yep. So unfortunately, this format is set up where it will wrap you. But we get it.
Go ahead on and do you, David Banks. Keep us in line, okay? Don't back down. Do not back down,
I'm just
okay?
letting you know that the system is working.
Keep it real, okay? Keep it real.
I just want to see how far I could go.
I want to thank all of you for responding to that. And I want to thank Ajani. We had a number of people in the chat who said Ajani for mayor. And watch this. The reality is this. We need a school system which looks at every young man and woman that looks like Ajani and sees a future mayor. Because when you see that, you will govern yourself accordingly. And so with that, I want to move to the next question, and that is from Dr. Joanna Johnson. Dr. Johnson?
So good evening. My name is Dr. Joanna Johnson, and I serve as the Chief Achievement Officer for the Eagle Academy Foundation. In addition to supporting nearly a network of nearly 3,000 young men of color and their families, Eagle Academy Foundation also supports the educators and the leaders charged to serve them. Many of the principals and systems leaders we work with have expressed concerns about high stakes testing. There is not substantial research that consistently links high stakes testing to improve student outcomes, especially for Black and Brown children. Beyond the biased nature of these standardized assessments, the increased emphasis on testing reduces teachers' time and ability to focus on deeper learning and significantly contributes to school decisions to reduce art, technology, and other elective classes. So my question is, if elected mayor, how would you support educators and leaders to ensure a greater emphasis on diverse student experiences and mastery learning over rote learning and drill and kill associated with high stakes test preparation? These things disproportionately impact the quality of teaching and the magnitude of learning for many Black and brown students from underserved and under-resourced communities.
Great, thank you. Ray, could you get us started with that?
Sure, I can. First, let me observe, Dr. Banks, that there was a mention of the Schaumburg, in which I've been involved for quite some time, been a big supporter. Was there when we announced Khalil Muhammad and Kevin Young. Also have been acknowledged by at least 3 HBCUs, been heavily involved in Morehouse, where I've been recognized, involved with Spelman, and was chartered ahead for Howard. So the HBCUs are fundamental to who I am and what I've been involved with. With respect to these tests, you know, I do not support these tests being the sole criteria, and we're teaching to the test as opposed to teaching to the students. The admission criteria ought to be changed. It ought to include things like grades and recommendation and essays and extracurricular activities. We have a daughter now who's applying to college. They're going to take a look at her entire portfolio of contribution. She's involved in the arts. She's involved in athletics. She's clearly involved in the academic part. She's a leader. She's a leader in student government. And so the thing that the test doesn't do is it ignores a large percentage of who the child is. And so if we rely solely on that, we have lost an important part, a large percentage of what makes these children, so that they can exceed, so that they can get the opportunity. So I would not be for this high-speed testing. I would create standards where tests would be part of it. We need to have metrics so that we can measure how well our children are progressing, but I would expand. I've talked about art and arts education. I've talked about performing as well as visual arts included in that, so that we can look at the entire child. I guess they're calling it the whole child, but we need to make certain that in total, as we educate these children, that we look at, take the children, have the curriculum, go to where the children are. Let's not prescribe, and let it certainly not be a prescription where we have to meet solely one criteria, which is a test criteria. We're missing out and we're losing our children along the way.
Thank you, Ray. Thank you. Shaun?
Dr. Johnson, thank you for the question and for the work that you do every day. And look, I think we have a real opportunity at this moment with a explosion of protests, of demands for change broadly around equity. And I said earlier that my first policy I announced as a mayoral candidate was to create a chief equity officer who would look at every issue across the city as an equity issue. I think we have a real opportunity in this moment, while we are also seeing the country move away from high stakes testing, whether it is the SAT and others. This is a moment where we really can remake the system. And I believe that there are a whole set of potential directions to go that we ought to be exploring. We ought to be looking at, for example, instead of just a single test determining who gets to go to our specialized high schools, the opportunity for the top percentage of every class, of every school, to be able to be automatically enrolled. We ought to be looking at other factors in terms of achievement that should be factored into every decision we're making about the opportunities available to our kids. And so I am very open to moving away from the high stakes testing. And this is particularly true for our youngest children. Think about the fact that for fourth graders, we're determining the life chances in our educational system through these high stake tests at an age when certainly my kids weren't ready for those tests. And we know all children that we are missing the mark, and we're measuring just privilege rather than underlying opportunity for achievement. But what we have to be clear about is that whatever we replace the system with, we must have a mayor who puts in place the measurements, the relentless understanding that equity will be a lens for whatever system we put in place. Because if it doesn't work, we have to keep making changes as well.
Thank you, Shaun. Eric?
You know, I swear I must have a different stopwatch, and I'm going to buy one for all of my colleagues so they can stay within the time limits. Let's look at this. A major car company announced that they will be moving away from powered vehicles and move to electric vehicles. Entirely different technology. Oxford University just did a report some years ago announcing in the next 20 years, 40% of the jobs we're training our children for won't be available. We're not talking about just self-driving cars. We're not talking about just factory type employment. Look at the floor of the stock market at its peak, 5,000 employees. We're down to 500 now. Eliminate insurance, no longer utilize insurance brokers. They use computer learning, artificial intelligence. China has changed the game on how they educate their children. I've been back and forth there 6 times studying some of the things they're doing in education. Why am I saying that? Testing is not the tools we need for the future. We need to change what we are teaching our children, rope learning, agrarian calendar, not using technology. That's a failing device and method that should be using. We're preparing our children to be factory employees and not owners of business. We need to be teaching critical thinking, communication, working in groups, all of those skills that are needed, as well as some of the tech skills. Everyone may not go to college, but everyone should have the ability to be gainfully employed. That's why I put $5 million into the Brooklyn STEAM Center. We can allow our children to receive certifications prior to graduating from high school. So even if they go to college, they could be gainfully employed to pay for their college, like I did. We could do a better job, and testing is not the way.
Thank you, Eric. Andrew?
Thank you for this question. To me, really the key term is high stakes, in that why are we outsourcing and even abdicating our own evaluation of our kids to this test? It really does not make much sense at all. It's like, we know that there are kids who have incredible qualities that aren't going to get picked up by this test. And so we should have confidence to say, look, we know this kid's great, like that, like we know this kid belongs in whatever program or school, and we should make that reflect the composition of the city. Like, to me, it's ridiculous that this test has become so high stakes, and the fact that at this point, teachers are being tyrannized by it. We have to trust teachers to be able to evaluate our kids independent of this. We also need to educate or emphasize and invest in technical, vocational, and apprenticeship programs, and not pretend that all of our kids are going to be heading to a 4-year college, which is part of the tyranny of the test. It's like, our kids have wondrous talents. Not all of them belong in like an office or a cubicle or whatnot. Like, and we have massive needs as a city and a society for people who can build things, improve things, help overhaul our decrepit infrastructure. So to me, the problem is just that we're relying on this test for things it should not be relied upon for at all.
Thank you. And now we will have Scott.
I agree with a lot of what my colleagues have said about teaching to the test, recognizing that so much of these tests are discriminatory, especially with kids of color. My own child at the age of 4 took a 4-year-old test. It was just ridiculous, and I would suspend that immediately. But look, if we're really going to do something about it, then let's stop talking about it and let's start preparing to do something. The reality is that at the specialized high schools in New York City, almost no Black or brown kids can get into Stuyvesant, can get into Bronx Science, any of these schools, because the test that they're taking is not geared to classroom learning. It's geared towards just a way that keeps Black and brown kids out. I respect parents who have test prep and who get their kids into Stuyvesant, but if we're really going to start breaking down the barriers to entry, if we're really going to be serious about this, we have to take bold moves. So as mayor, I would go to Albany and I would repeal Heck Calandra. I would move the Shazat test out of the test taking for these specialized schools, replace it at the minimum with the 7th grade test, which is about classroom learning. And I just think we have to match our rhetoric with making the fundamental changes that allows all kids, kids of color to succeed. If we maintain the status quo and we're not willing to step up and make bold decisions, then we will be back here at another David Banks forum talking about the exact same thing. We have to take bold action now.
Thank you, Scott. Dianne.
Yes, hi, thanks. So let me just say here, as an educator, the first thing I believe is that yes, not everybody has to go to college, but everybody who wants to go to college should have that opportunity. I am not in support of high stakes testing or testing as a means for assessing our students' ability or achievement. As a matter of fact, I will actually point out that I have created I'm responsible for having developed a career program for students that provided them with access to healthcare without the high stakes testing. It was a partnership with Hostess Community College, Montefiore Medical Center, and my former organization. And our students went on actually to access careers in healthcare and exceeded national retention and promotion averages. And that was based on providing experiential learning. And one of the things I've called for is the inclusion of the city as a classroom in our schools. We should be partnering with community-based organizations, arts and cultural institutions, and providing our students with experiential opportunities and assessing them based on portfolios, based on their experiences. We should be providing them with access to a plethora of careers and opportunities so that they're able to make informed decisions about their futures. And we don't need testing to do that. We have the talent in our teacher pool to do that. We have the resources in our city. And we know that those tests actually do our children a disservice. And we need to find alternative ways of assessing their progress and assessing where they are and what their needs are.
Thank you. And Maya, I hope you got the overall gist of the question.
I'm not sure I did. I heard it was just posted in the chat, so I'm just looking for it.
High stakes testing has essentially sapped the joy out of teaching, as well as the educational learning experience for so many of our children. Just to cut to the chase on it, what is your position around high stakes testing?
My position is that high stakes testing is not good stakes. And so what we really have to do is look at how we assess to understand whether we're helping our students get where they need to go. One of the things we recommended as part of the School Diversity Advisory Group was that we had folks who were academics who were expert at assessment as part of the discussion in that group. And what we said is we need to have a committee that creates alternative assessment tools that help children find their way and also help ensure we know and understand whether they're learning what they need to learn. But that's very different from high stakes. The whole notion that we have some kids who are deserving and some kids are not, and that somehow we would sort them, we have to change. I literally had, when my daughter was in a public middle school, it was one that had an admissions process. And I literally had to have a fight with the principal who called her lazy because she didn't think her academic grades matched her test scores. Rather than looking at the problem, I, as a parent, was trying to bring to her attention about what was wrong in the classroom. That means all of the attention was at exactly the wrong thing, and that my child was called lazy by a principal. So we have to flip the whole thing on its head. We have to understand that every single one of our children are exceptional and that we have to be creative in delivering what works for them and in assessing whether it's working and fixing it when it doesn't.
Thank you, Maya. Thank you. We're going to move on to our next to last question. And this question is coming from a very dynamic young lady who was one of our New York City public school teachers. And she's also very active in our organization, BU. And I want to be very clear with all due respect, this is not the David Banks Forum. The power of this forum, and I just want to say it, is that what this forum is representing is the coming together of Black educators all across the city who said we are tired of just having conversations talking to ourselves, but we're going to speak truth to power and we're going to be organized. And so Courtney Johnson represents this newer, younger generation of educators in our system that we ought to be very proud is part of our system, and I'm very proud of her. Courtney.
Good evening, candidates, and good evening, David Banks, Esquire. Thank you for your time this evening. My name is Courtney Johnson. I'm an IEP teacher in Southeast Jamaica, Queens, and I also serve as the chair of communications for Black Edfluencers United. So, New York City's public school system currently consists of 80% of students that are Black and brown. Unfortunately, our workforce does not represent the same demographic, often resulting in Black educators to be defaulted as mandated disciplinarians by our non-Black counterparts, who are often quick to kick Black students out of class or refer them to special education before even attempting to understand them or provide effective academic intervention. As a result, we are losing teachers and students. What are you going to do to ensure that culturally responsive teaching and equity and inclusion are more than just coined terms designed by the Department of Education to truly impact Black and brown student and teacher retention rates?
Thank you, Courtney. Shaun, would you start us off?
Sure, Courtney, thank you. And first, I want to say, I'll go back to something I said earlier about making a specific commitment, the only candidate who has, about what share of our teaching workforce we would get to at the end of my first term. And we have to do that. That is a prerequisite for any of the work that we're going to build on that really gets to your question. The second is we have to look very clearly at what we are doing to screen kids for special education at a very early age. We now know, we have undeniable evidence that there is discriminatory selection at work in who gets screened out for IEPs and for a whole range of directions in our classrooms. That has to change as well. We have to ensure that at the earliest age that we begin to do that. I also want to raise an issue we haven't talked about in any depth tonight, which is the presence of policing in our schools and the ways in which Black and brown students are victimized too often in our schools. So I have proposed that we should remove police from our schools and that we should be replacing them with coordinators that are focused on the emotional and social well-being of our students, that we're treating criminal justice with justice, not just with a focus on the criminal, and that we are making sure that we are focusing our efforts in ways that get to the underlying public health challenges of violence in our schools, rather than compounding a prison pipeline and a cycle of incarceration that has victimized far too many kids of color in this city and across this country.
Thank you so much, Shaun. Eric?
Yes, a great question, and thank you for that question. There was an amazing report that I read from a Yale sociologist that talked about the perception. And really, if we're honest, it doesn't matter how much money you pour into a school system. If the educators don't believe in the abilities of the children who are there, it actually impacts on the ability of the child to really achieve at a level that is what's expected. And so, yes, we need implicit bias training, real implicit bias training that is coming from Black scholars who are knowledgeable in this area. My administration will create a professional development program for educators to ensure they are culturally responsive to all the students, particularly Black students. Oftentimes, you will look at a Black child and you will have a low expectation of that child, and that low expectation will impact on their ability to achieve at a higher level. I remember my days as a cop, fighting against the racism in the police department, and no one wanted to hear. It wasn't until we had the Diallo type cases where people finally acknowledged that. That's what we're doing now. When people are saying now they're acknowledging through to COVID, but no, Black and brown educators have been talking about this for years. This is not new. They were just being ignored. And we need a mayor that is not going to ignore those who are closest to the action, that understands how to reform a system, and will participate in the reforming of how do we deal with the lack of cultural understanding in every aspect of education, every book, every lesson plan, every curriculum, the full scope of education.
Thank you, Eric. Andrew? You're muted.
I noticed that. All right, I'm back. Thank you for this question. There are at least 3 things we need to do. Number 1, we need to recruit more Black teachers and educators that are more reflective of the communities that you all are teaching in. Number 2, we need to have white educators not outsource responsibility for their Black students to Black teachers when it comes to discipline and other matters. And that can include training, but it can also include a very clear message that, look, these are your students, you have responsibility for them, and you're not supposed to be, frankly, putting this burden on some of your Black colleagues. Number 3, we need to support Black teachers and educators so we don't lose you after you enter the system, which is something you're describing, Courtney, that if someone is in the classroom and feels like they're not being supported or burdens are being placed upon you, then we lose you, and that's self-defeating. So these are the 3 things we should be doing better to ensure that you don't have extra responsibilities as a Black educator, because it's super painful when your race becomes part of your job in that way, like in a way where you have extra responsibility. We need to improve the ratio of Black educators so that it's not anything of an extra burden for those of you in the classroom.
Thank you, Andrew. Scott?
Look, we've been fighting the school to prison pipeline for far too long. I remember when I was a young assembly member standing with Al Vann and Roger Green and so many others who in Albany said to Republican state senators, stop building these prisons in upstate New York to create economic development around the prison, because they could get that up and running for 18 months. They would take mostly Black and brown kids downstate, ship them upstate, and literally create an economy for the upstate community. There were those of us in the assembly who said, don't do that. Build schools and daycare centers, give kids jobs, hope and opportunity. We saw firsthand what that plan was. It was about money. And I saw it as city controller, because instead of the government building prisons, the hedge funders and the wealthiest people started to invest in the private prison industrial complex. And that's why as controller, I was proud to be the first treasurer controller in the United States to divest holdings from that private prison industrial complex. That was the same group of hedge funders who built ICE detention centers. We have seen what money does when it's about taking kids into the correctional institutions. But I believe locally in the school system, as I mentioned earlier in the evening, we have to recognize that only 40% of our teaching staff in New York City are people of color in a system where it's 80% students of color. We need to employ my teacher residency program, because 40% of our teachers, I've done the numbers, leave after 5 years. We're going to have to recruit 1,000 teachers a year, and we're going to have to include many, many, many teachers of color. And the best way to do that is to incentivize them to stay in the system. We've got to offer financial resources to teachers who are going for their graduate degrees and getting ready for their certifications. Let's get them the master teacher experience, a mentor teacher and a new teacher, and make this a profession where it's exciting and it's resourced. And my plan would do that if I'm mayor.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Scott. Dianne?
Great. So I'll start off by saying that as a former special education teacher myself, my fight against the overrepresentation of our children in special education started in 1990 when I went up against the school administration for a young student that I had in my class who was brilliant and did not belong in the classroom that she was in. It continued my fight when my son was in kindergarten and his white male teacher suggested that he needed to go into special education because he was too affectionate. So I have firsthand experience with that. I would say that, one of the things we need to focus on is moving away from policing and punitive discipline practices by eliminating police from our schools, focusing on healing processes, including increasing mental health, counseling, and supportive staff, implementing transformative and restorative practices instead, and eliminating suspensions. We need to further engage our educators in overhauling the curriculum so that we can ensure that it is culturally responsive and reflective of our Black and Brown students. And we need to partner with CBOs and CUNY to create a teacher training pipeline that provides career pathways for our community members who have been disproportionately impacted by the economic downturn as a result of COVID-19 and before. I'll stop there.
Thank you, Diane. Now we'll go to Ray.
Thank you. You know, my middle brother is a paraprofessional. My mother-in-law, 95 years old, was a teacher, then a curriculum leader, then an assistant principal, and retired as a principal, Detroit public school system. So I have some direct familiarity with what's taking place with teachers. And the way that we began to solve this is to invest in the teachers. And what do I mean by that? We need first to make sure that we have developed relationships, pipelines from the HBCUs and from CUNY to make sure that we have a view that we have access to the next generation of teachers. We can begin to invest there. And for those teachers who are already part of the system, we need to make sure that we continue to invest in them, to give them the training, to make sure that they are appropriately compensated, especially at the beginning of the process, which is my cradle to career from 0 to 4, make sure that those teachers are appropriately compensated, because that's where it all begins. And then through the course of their careers, make sure that we continue to invest in them and invest in the principals so the principals have the wherewithal so they can maintain their roles as leaders, so they can recruit and retain the best teachers, and so that they're the ones who are responsible for developing the relationships with the HBCUs and developing the pipeline. I can remember growing up, teachers who looked like me, I knew cared about me. I knew all the teachers cared about me, but especially the ones who looked like me. And I knew that they could pull me aside and they could treat me the way that my mother treated me. They could discipline me in a way that I knew that it was in my best interest. So we need to make certain that we identify, recruit, attract, and retain, and continue to train and invest in those teachers. And that's the way we're going to get to this culturally diverse curriculum, culturally diverse leadership, culturally diverse that embraces our children and values our children for whom they are and what they can be. That's how I would go about it.
Thank you so much. And lastly on this question, Maya.
Thank you. I want to say I agree with so much of what's been said. One thing we haven't heard on teachers and diverse teachers is taking models like the Bronx Plan, where we're actually paying teachers more and attracting them and retaining them in schools that need high qualified teachers, because it's both being representative, but it's also having highly qualified teachers. And we know that's something we should engage in, as including training. But I think the question was, and there are many other things we've talked about, but the question went to how will you make sure that equity and inclusion and racial justice is happening within the system structurally? And that requires not just having a separate unit floating unto itself within the DOE that is responsible for equity and inclusion, and that implicit bias training and all that, because as we watched the backlash from within the system from some folks who were white who refused and attacked implicit bias training. So first of all, you have to make them measurable outcomes around equity that every single manager is responsible for meeting, because you, in addition to having implicit bias training, the training only works when there are rules of the road and accountability to the outcomes the training is supposed to support. So you want to have the supports, you want to invest in success, but you also have to have the responsibility and the accountable metrics that you're holding people accountable to meeting. If they are not meeting it, they are not meeting their job requirements. And it is that simple in terms of finding and holding the accountability. And when I'm mayor, you won't need a chief diversity officer because you'll have a civil rights advocate that spent their whole career doing it.
Thank you, Maya. We have now come to the final question of the evening, and this question is coming from Adrienne Straker. Adrienne?
Good evening, and thank you all for being with us. As David shared, my name is Adrienne Straker, and I'm the president-elect of ABENY, the Association of Black Educators of New York. And I've also been an educator for 30 years, having been raised by a widowed teacher myself. My father was a late police officer, so I am a blue-collar, through and through New Yorker. That being said, we as educators like to give you a last bite at the apple. So here it is. Given the magnitude of the budget and the achievement gap in New York City, the city now faces a humongous challenge. How will your administration properly fund the over 1,700 schools and multi-agency program collaborations to provide equity across communities for Black students and families?
Eric, if you would lead us off.
Yes, and Adrian, I was sitting here smiling as I start my stopwatch so I could be within the limit. You said something that resonated with me. You said you were blue collar. And I say this often on the campaign trail. That's who I am. You know, there's nothing fancy about me. I have calluses on my hands. My nails are not polished and shiny. I'm a blue collar person. And I've learned if all of us go into our bloodline, they're going to find that there's a blue collar person that set the foundation that we are standing on right now. They took every dollar that they earned, they invested it into putting food on the table for today and the future that we're all enjoying right now. The problem in our city is that we are taking taxpayers' dollars and we're treating it like we're trust fund babies that are spending it without any concern about how hard taxpayers have worked to get that money. I'm going to prioritize spending for equity. That's the key. Those who are in need should receive the resources to have a system where equity exists, but we have to do it in a smart way. The DOE is bloated. Not enough money is going into the instruction and learning of our schools. We need to reformat the DOE, not just a way that just to do something new. No, let's reimagine education. Let's scale up what's successful. Let's do away with those that aren't. Let's look at some of those pre-existing contracts for years that were in charge of improving instruction, still producing terrible results, but we still pay for them. That's a blue collar mindset. So yes, like you, I'm a blue collar person. Went to CUNY at night, washed dishes in a restaurant, worked in the mailroom to help my mother out. That's the blue collar leader we need. We had enough white collar mayors. Let's have a blue collar mayor that understands us all.
Thank you, Eric. Andrew.
Thank you for this question, Adrian. It's very, very real. We're facing a multi-billion-dollar operating deficit as far as the eye can see. The number I saw last was that we may have lost 143,000 school children as well, which is going to reduce funding because in New York State, funding follows students. So the key is going to be to try and channel our resources more effectively. We should certainly try and get our fair share, both from DC and Albany. But to me, the resources need to be concentrated around our kids. So that's teachers, that's administrators, that's the physical classroom. And then if you look at it ground up, you will see that we are spending a significant amount on resources and programs that are not actually touching our kids on a daily basis. And that's where you have to look first if you're forced to seek cost savings, which will be the case. It's going to be very real in the years ahead. So we need to be able to cut smart and preserve the value and even invest. I am confident that we're going to be able to invest resources in things that are going to make a difference for our kids if we do this right.
Thank you, Andrew. Maya.
So here's the thing. As someone who has fought for education equity and funding, as someone who has fought for access to healthcare and for food justice and for all kinds of economic justice, I'll tell you that the starting point is a moral budget. And a moral budget means we're investing in our kids and their success because they are the future. And I mean our kids who look like us. And that starts with one, recognizing that, yes, we need to go and get the money Albany owes us. We also have to be talking to the federal government because there is an opportunity to get more funds, particularly Title I funds. And that's one I'll lead hard into. But we also have to ask that every single person in the city put on the table what they have to give. Some people don't have money to give, but they have know-how, they have talent, and they have ideas. And then there are some who have resources. And we should ask, our folks with resources to invest in the future of this city. That includes investing in the economy. So I will ask for a wealth tax and work with our legislators in Albany for that, to put more money in our schools. But let's not let a good crisis go to waste. It's a bad crisis, but we can make it an opportunity, because 618 of our schools are grossly overcrowded. And that does impact the educational quality for our kids. And they're too often our kids in those overcrowded schools. But we have, and I've proposed in New Deal New York, $10 billion in capital spend to both create 100,000 new jobs, but do it to do things that solve problems in communities hard hit by COVID. That means Black and Latino and Asian communities. And that would include bringing those class sizes down. So those are resources that help us do that. And we do not have to ask anyone's permission for those resources. And that's what I will do as mayor.
Thank you, Maya. Scott?
Look, the DOE budget is the biggest of any city agency, $28.5 billion. And I'd like to see more of that money in the classrooms. You know, I'm the candidate running for mayor as controller who's audited the Department of Education. I know where the money is being wasted. I know where the bodies are buried. I know the outside contracts that are so outrageous that only a few company clicks are basically getting the benefit. I found as controller computers in closets. I found as controller a broken procurement system. And while we all agree that we want to help our kids, especially the kids who struggle, we also have to be strategic financially. So look, Biden has proposed $175 billion for education nationally. We have to see what that means for New York City, but we have got to grab that money to do the kind of investment to break down the barriers for all of our kids. At the end of the day, the moment I become mayor, I know exactly the hundreds of millions of dollars that is being spent specifically on the bureaucracy at the DOE. Think about the de Blasio administration. They hire a chancellor, and then the chancellor brings in all the bureaucrats. Then the chancellor retires, so they hire the new chancellor. So the new chancellor brings in bureaucrats. Now you have two levels of bureaucrats operating at the same time. Meanwhile, who's not getting the money? The teachers, the principals, the schools, and the kids. And I know exactly where this spend is going, because I don't have to guesstimate. I don't have to make it up. I've got the audits. And by the way, those audits for anyone to see, not only did I audit these agencies, but I made many recommendations as how to move that money in a more effective way. So I'm running as somebody who believes passionately about the education system, but I also know that talk is cheap. You can make a lot of promises and throw money at everything, but first you got to find the money. You have to redirect the money. And you have to have a budget plan, or we're not going to be able to do the things that we all want to do for the kids who struggle.
Thank you, Scott. Thank you, Scott. Dianne?
Yes, thank you so much, David. So, the first thing I'll say is that whenever we get into this conversation about the budget and people talk about austerity, not that anyone here has said that yet, it makes me think of code. It's just code. It's code for those of us, the communities that have been hardest impacted, to brace ourselves to bear even more of the brunt of the burden. The reality of it is that we need to prioritize our values, and that we need to put our money where our mouth is on that in that regard. So I would start off with controlling what we can. I've already called for defunding the police. That would release a significant amount of dollars for us to provide alternative services in our schools. I also think that we need to look at the inefficiencies in our city government and tighten our belts there first, so that we can prioritize our children. The next thing I'll say is we got to tax the rich. Over the last year, we've created 118 additional billionaires in this state that made an additional $60 billion. And so that money needs to come back into our communities. The last thing I'll say is that New York City is responsible for bringing the greatest amount of revenue to the state. It's time for the state to pay it back and look out for us. It is not done. The last thing I'll say is, as someone who has managed budgets where I was being reimbursed at 80 cents on the dollar, and I figured out not just how to close those deficits, but to grow the organizations I've run, I don't think there's anybody else in this race that can say the same thing. I can get it done. I can fund our schools. Thank you.
Thank you, Dianne. Ray?
Yeah, let's talk about the budget first, and I will lead people to recognize that I've just come out with a plan to grow 500,000 jobs that is going to generate a significant amount of revenue. And what you know, and I've managed budgets. I've managed at least 50 budgets, and so I have the experience and the leadership to manage budgets. And what my plan outlines is leading the greatest, most inclusive economic comeback in the history of New York City. And what we know, those who have experiences with budgets, is that you can't tax your way out of this. Those people who have resources like me, we're going to have to pay more, and we can get more efficiencies. But the income taxes are 14% of the budget. We just saw that real estate property taxes that represent 50% of the budget are down 15%. We're facing an enormous crisis, so we have to grow our way out of this. We can't tax our way out of this. We can't be more efficient. We got to grow our way out of this. And so that's for one. For two, as I think about how we manage this, $25,000 per student it's not a question of spending. Not a question of spending. You know, I talked to Dakota Keys at PS 272, which is one of the greatest examples of public-private partnerships, which is what we're going to have to use here to make sure that the education system and the system continues to have the resources that are necessary. We need to make sure that we reallocate the dollars in the budget. Of the 25,000, probably less than 10,000 goes to the actual classroom, to the principals. And so we need to make certain that we look at that and reallocate those dollars. We do need to look at the efficiencies. We do need to look at the bureaucracy, which is bloated. But we also need to make sure that we reallocate those dollars to get them into the classrooms. And then, as has been spoken about, this Biden administration is committed to an increase in Title I funding. I want to be there and help lead the request, the fight for New York City to make sure that we get our fair share of that, given what we contribute to the overall budget. And so that's how I think about it.
Thank you, Ray. I appreciate that. And the final comment from Shaun Donovan.
David, thank you. And thank you for all of the work that you've put into tonight. It's been a remarkable conversation with incredible ideas from all of the candidates. So thank you to all the candidates as well. Look, when President Obama asked me to be his budget director over the $4 trillion federal budget, he reminded me that a budget is not just a ledger of dollars and cents, it's a measure of our values. And he asked me to lead the federal budget in that way. We should remember that when President Obama came into office, we had the largest budget deficit since World War II. We dramatically reduced it while at the same time making huge investments in healthcare, in education, in housing and homelessness, in so many things that we need to do here in New York City. I believe we need three things. First, we need a mayor who can actually get us the help that we deserve from Washington, D.C. Each year, we send $23 billion more to DC than we get back in return. No one in this race has the relationships, the knowledge to be able to get New York the help it deserves. Just last month, I was on the phone with leaders in Congress, helping negotiate the $100 billion that we got to go to schools in this country. And that's something that I could do as mayor. Second, we need Albany to send us our fair share of what we deserve. I agree that we ought to be winning the campaign for fiscal equity. I would use every resource at my disposal as mayor to make sure that we got the resources we deserve at the state level. And then finally, we need a city budget that actually prioritizes our children and learning. Right now, we are spending almost $600,000 per prisoner at Rikers. How can that be? We are spending $3 billion a year on homeless services. We must reprioritize spending in this city and invest in our kids.
Thank you, Shaun. Thank you so much. And thank you to everybody. Let me just say this as we wrap up here for the evening. On behalf of the Eagle Academy Foundation, Black Edfluencers United, and the Association of Black Educators of New York, I want to thank you all for participating in our forum this evening. We look forward to learning more about your expanded education platform, and we truly welcome the invitation to be in dialogue with you about the issues that matter most to our community. I remind everyone that the primary election for New York City Mayor will be held this year early on Wednesday, June 23rd, and will feature ranked choice voting. We have included a link in the chat that explains ranked choice voting. Please copy it, mark it, and read it. Finally, each month, myself and other leaders of prominent nonprofit organizations will organize dynamic conversations like the one that we had here tonight. We call it Sunday Supper. And Sunday Supper is an opportunity for parents and their children to come together online to hear from dynamic and influential individuals and to learn about critical issues affecting our communities. Sunday Supper is free and open to the public. So I'm going to ask you now to please take note and save the date of February 21st from 6 to 7 p.m. We will be hosting a conversation on the role of media and democracy. We will send the information to everyone who registered for tonight's event. Well over 1,000 people, 1,500 who registered. Please join us for another exciting conversation at that time. Everyone, please have a great Black History Month. Thank you for joining us. Have a wonderful evening, and please stay safe. God bless.